Hello everyone, this is Kincaid from server 309, and in this video I'm gonna walk you through all the immortals that you can invest in the early game to get a lot of value, because I see a lot of people building some random immortals in their marches. They don't know exactly the mechanics or the synergy between each and every immortal, so I'm here to help you. So we're gonna talk about earth, wind, fire, lightning, and water, the basic elements that you can start with in any new server. However, I don't really recommend to start with a wind march, and I'm gonna tell you why. However, let's just not waste any time anymore and get to it. So Earth is definitely my favorite element to start with because they make your life so easy, either against the gnomes, Wheel of Time, and Mysterium. They're so good in these modes, and that will help you to grow your account very quickly. The higher gnomes you kill, the more XP you get, the higher or the better equipment that you get, and this will make your squad a lot stronger, faster. And the more you pass Wheel of Time faster, that means that you will be able to boost your immortals faster as well. As for the immortals that you need to invest in, it will be the basic Earth March that everyone starts with. It is Charles, Alex, Zenobia, and Cleopatra. As for the very, very early game, and I mean by the first week or two in the server, you're not gonna really use Cleopatra and Zenobia because they are not really that efficient at 2 or 3 stars. You will be using Medib and Minatori. They are so much better compared to the other two immortals because they are so easy to develop. You can see here I have a Medib at 7 stars and I have a Minatori at 6 stars, and that means I'm also kind of a bit slow because I should have a Minatoris at 7 stars by now. These two immortals are way better than Cleopatra and Zenobia at the early game, so make sure to use those two immortals. As for Charles, he's kind of I know he's a bit expensive for the mid spenders or even the low spenders, but he's really worth the investment, and he's gonna make your life a lot easier. And even in the late game, you will be keeping him either in PvP or PvE. Alexander the Great, without question, he is one of the strongest epic immortals in the game when it comes to dealing damage, if not the strongest. And I know there's a lot of counters for Alexander, but you don't have to worry about this. I'm sure that you will manage, or Alex will manage to deal damage somehow in the team fight. So he's definitely worth the investment. You need to get Alex in your Earth March. So in conclusion, in order to build a decent or a solid Earth March in the early game, you will need Charles, you will need Alexander, you will need Zenobia, and you will need Cleopatra. Lightning is in the early game is kind of makes your life a lot harder compared to an earth march or a water march because they don't have a lot of sustain. The only form of sustain they have is from Tokugawa, and it only blocks the physical damage. However, it's kind of a bit harder to do Wheel of Time or Gnomes or Mysterium compared to earth or water. However, they are so powerful to deal with earth marches because of the wounds that comes from Genghis Khan, and you will be able to beat a lot of players who are running earth or maybe water, but your grow will be a bit slower compared to the earth users. The lightning team could be tricky to build in the early game because right now there is just so much immortals available in the early game. I remember back then when it was only Richard, Peter, Jenkins, and YSG. Those were the only four immortals, along with Elced, of course, the only four immortals or the only five immortals that is available in the early game. But right now we have Tokugawa, we have Louise, and so many more immortals. So my recommendation, my personal recommendation, is getting Jenkins as soon as possible, since he's the best or the most important immortal to invest in the lightning team because of course the wounds that he's applied or the AoE damage that he deals. Tokugawa is also a very important lightning immortal. He's very powerful. He's a defense support immortal. He works exactly like Charles, except that Charles blocks all the damage. Tokugawa blocks only the physical damage, but he's still a very powerful immortal to use, especially against an immortal such as Alex. And he's my second recommendation for this lightning team. Peter's ultimate skill was aimed originally to counter Alex's ultimate skill. However, later on, Alex will unlock his exclusive artifact, which means that the skill cannot be dispelled. That means that Peter is kind of useless. He deals a bit of damage, but I don't recommend to build him. Louise is a bit tricky to use because Louise's skill actually was aimed to increase the magical damage that comes from Hammurabi, and I know Hammurabi is not available in the early game. However, Louise still deals so much damage with his ultimate skill, so you can still use him. If you're not willing to use Louise, you can definitely use El Cid instead. El Cid will be working to counter Alexander, since he is the main counter or the best counter for Alexander. So you can choose between either Louise for damage or El Cid for sustain. If you want to utilize the lightning dragon's damage, then definitely you can use Richard. Richard is the only lightning immortal that can apply stun to the opponents, which means that the stunned opponent will receive double the damage from the lightning dragon. And this is just insane for the early game because everyone's troops is very low in HP and the dragon's damage is just insane. The last immortal that we have is YSG. I know he does not add that much into the march, but he's very powerful when it comes to protecting Jankees. Later on in season 1 you will be able to use a couple of skills that support Jankees. However, he's the only option that we have, so you kind of have no choice in the early game. So if you can afford only 4 immortals to work on in the early game, then my recommendations for one squad is Tokugawa, Louise, Jankees, and YSG. Fire Marches have probably the toughest start in the early game because some of the immortals are not available until later stages of the game, such as Empress Wu, unless you were very, very lucky to summon her in the Hall of Immortals or summon her through the random shards you get from the ship. So Fire Marches, as I used to call it, is a glass cannon march. They are all about damage, damage, and damage. The reason for that because they have an insane amount of energy regain on an immortal such as Empress Wu or an immortal such as Hippolyta, and they deal so much damage in a very short time. That means that they are a glass cannon march and they don't have any kind of sustain whatsoever. I think even if you use some skills from Tower of Knowledge that provide some sustain, it will not be as efficient because they need to finish the fight very quickly before the enemy team is able to do any damage. So to build a decent fire march in the early game, definitely you will have to work on Empress Wu, one of the most powerful fire immortals in the game, and then Hippolyta. Both immortals will still in your main march even in the late game. And then if you can afford Trajan, that would be wonderful. If you cannot, then you will have to use William until you can sort out something for Trajan. I know there's a lot of events and a lot of ways you can obtain Trajan, and it just will take a bit of time. Same for Cyrus. Cyrus is obtainable through King of the Hill in the first season of the game, but he's a bit harder to build as well. Water is definitely the easiest element to build in the early game because all the immortals are just available in everywhere. You can get Attila from the daily deals, you can get Merlin if you make any purchase, and you can get Harold from Arena, you can get Yushitsuyon from the event in the early game of the server, and then Dido, it will take a bit of time, but sooner or later you will unlock her. So if you would like to build a solid water march that will remain strong even in the later seasons, then here are the immortals that you need to work with. Let's start with Merlin. Merlin is so easy to obtain and it's kind of obvious. Just make any purchase. Second is Attila. Attila is a very powerful attack immortal. He deals a lot of control. He kind of makes your life a lot easier to deal with the back line of the enemy team. And then work with Ramses. Ramses is the best option available in season 1. Unfortunately, we don't have access to Ragnar yet. However, Ragnar is very powerful in the water march, but he's not in the early season. And the last immortal you will have to work with is either Dido or Artemisia. Personally, I think Artemisia is a bit better than Dido, but both immortals applies chill to boost Merlin's damage, and this will be a very powerful water march if you know how to build the right skills. As for the skills, this will be for a separate video. Finally, the wind marches. They're so annoying to build in the early game because they're so hard to get. Unless you were very extremely lucky in the summons, of course. There is just Hannibal Barca. You have to wait for the wheel to get him for 12k gens. Same for Kennemberer. You have to pay for Baldwin. And he's really not worth the investment. And Saladin is probably the only immortal that is easy to obtain since you can get him through the daily deals. And Matilda, I think Matilda is similar to Trajan. However, if you really insist on building a decent wind march, then you start with Hannibal Barca until you can get his exclusive artifact. You can get Baldwin, you can get Matilda, and you can get Salahuddin. For Hannibal and Ken Emperor, those two immortals have an insane synergy I'm gonna talk about in the mixed march, but this will be for another video. Anyway, this is it for this one. I hopefully covered all the immortals or all the early game squads that you can use. If you have any question, do not hesitate to leave it in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.